Hey everyone, ready to dig into something pretty crucial. It's a bill moving through Congress right now, H.R. 8046. The Rosatom Sanctions Enforcement Act.
Right,
We're
right.
talking about nuclear sanctions here. I know, sounds heavy, but
Yeah.
it's got some serious global implications, so bear with us. We've been going through Congressman Kean's statements. He's the one who brought it to the table, and a bunch of expert testimonies from a recent hearing. Pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, it's
We also
this is
just
a big deal.
Let's start with the basics. What is Rosatom? Why should we even care about this?
Okay, so Rosatom, think of them as Russia's nuclear powerhouse, right? They're involved in everything, building the plant, supplying the fuel, the whole 9 yards, and they've got their fingers in a lot of pies globally.
Okay, so big player in the nuclear world. Got it.
Hmm.
What's Congressman Kean, the bill's sponsor, so worried about? What's got him spooked?
Well, their whole deal with China is a major red flag, right? They've been providing assistance to China's nuclear program, and the lack of transparency about whether that assistance is totally for peaceful purposes is, well, it's unsettling.
And that's a concern
And
because,
China's been building up its nuclear arsenal at an alarming rate. There's this real fear that Russia might be helping them, speed things up, maybe more than we even realized.
so are we talking about fueling a potential nuclear arms race here?
That's the big fear, yeah. And it's not just China. This bill, it's trying to put the brakes on Rosatom's influence all over the world.
It seems like this bill is trying to tackle a lot at once. Sanctioning Rosatom, finding new sources for fuel, making sure the existing plants are safe. There's even stuff about that Rosatom plant in Iran, right?
Yeah, you got it. It's a multi-pronged approach to a really, really complex issue, which kind of begs the question, can the U.S. actually replace Rosatom on the world stage and get other countries to follow suit?
Especially when you consider that some countries might not be so eager to just cut ties with Russia entirely, right? This is where things get really complicated.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There are a lot of moving parts here.
So let's dive into the specifics here. What does this bill actually want to do?
Okay, so at its core, the Rosatom Sanctions Enforcement Act would essentially force the Biden administration to come up with an actual plan, something concrete, to reduce our dependence on Russian nuclear suppliers and find alternatives, diversify.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty strong message. But I noticed the bill also mentions waivers. Why include those if the goal is to get tough on Russia?
Well, you see, it's acknowledging that just cutting Rosatom off cold turkey could have some nasty side effects, especially for countries that really depend on them. Things like, oh, I don't know, medical isotopes, for example. Those waivers are there to try and soften the blow, navigate those tricky situations.
So it's not just about punishing Russia. It's about supporting Ukraine, countering Russia, making sure the whole nuclear landscape is, stable, and even thinking about patients who need those medical isotopes. Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
It really is, yeah. It's about walking a really, really fine line in a very complicated geopolitical situation.
This is way more intricate than I initially thought, to
Mm.
be honest. We're talking potential nuclear proliferation,
Ugh.
international relations, medical implications. Wow, it's a lot of process.
It's worth remembering this bill, it doesn't stop at sanctions. It actually asks for a full report on, how safe is our existing nuclear agreement with Russia.
Right, right, the 123 agreement, right? I remember something about that from the hearing.
Exactly.
Congressman Kean, and I think was it Mr. Rubio, seemed to think the Biden administration, well, they didn't seem too convinced the administration has a good grip on this whole Rosatom situation.
Yeah, they weren't sold on the current approach, that's for sure. Rurio's point was just slapping Rosatom on that SDN list, the one that freezes assets and blocks U.S. businesses from dealing with them. It's like putting a Band-Aid on on a much bigger problem.
So he's saying we need to think bigger, longer term, not just react in the moment.
Exactly. He was really hammering home this need for a real concrete plan to build up other suppliers, other options, because right now it feels kind of like we're just playing catch up.
Which feeds into that whole thing in the bill about the president needing a solid strategy to replace Rosatom. Right.
Yeah.
Globally, how do we move away from relying on them?
Exactly. It's not enough to just sanction. You got to have a plan, a roadmap, something to guide the U.S. and its allies towards, a future where Russian nuclear tech isn't the only game in town.
So it's like, okay, we can plenish Rosatom, but then what? We need a next step, and it needs to be a good one.
Right, and this bill is trying to make sure that happens.
And that's where those waivers come back into play, right? Because we can't exactly just say tough luck to countries that really depend on Rosatom, not without giving them a decent alternative.
You got it. Finding that balance with the waivers, that was a big point of contention in the hearing for sure. Especially the timeline for all this. How quickly can we realistically expect countries to cut ties with Rosatom?
Yeah, there was a lot of back and forth about dates, 2028, even 2032 for certain things. Like, wasn't it enriched uranium?
Yeah, they were talking about those timelines, and it really highlights how delicate this whole transition has to be. Can't just rip off the Band-Aid, got to do it slowly, make sure those essential things like those medical isotopes keep flowing.
Talk about a tightrope walk.
Hmm.
You've got the U.S. trying to pressure Russia, but also having to think about the consequences for us and our allies.
Hmm.
It's a tough spot to be in.
No doubt about it. High stakes chess match for sure. And then on top of all that, there's another piece of the puzzle. The safety of the plants Rosatom's already built.
Oh, right. There were some pretty big concerns about that plant in Iran, the Bushehr plant.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Mr. Ali, one of the other experts, he brought up some pretty alarming stuff about that plant, even hinted at the possibility of, a major accident.
That's a bit unsettling, to say the least. What kind of issues are we talking about here?
Well, he cited some reports from, the big international organizations, the IAEA and WANO, those guys, and they found some serious problems with the reactor that Rosatom supplied.
So now we're not just talking geopolitics, we're talking about a real, tangible safety risk.
Exactly. It's not just about who controls the nuclear market. It's about making sure that nuclear energy is, used responsibly, safely. And there's a real concern that Rosatom, well, their standards might not be quite where they need to be.
Which brings us right back to that whole idea of finding other suppliers, ones that hopefully have a better track record on safety.
Exactly. By fostering competition, supporting those alternatives, the bill is trying to raise the bar for everyone, make the whole industry safer, more secure.
This whole thing is like peeling back layers of an onion. Every time you think you've got a handle on it, there's another layer of complexity. We've got the geopolitical tug of war, the fear of a nuclear arms race, the economic fallout of breaking away from Rosatom, and now this very real safety concern.
And those are just the big ones. It's a lot to wrap your head around, for sure. This bill, it really shows how something that seems, kind of technical, bureaucratic, just a piece of legislation can have huge, huge ripple effects all over the world.
No kidding. It feels like we're just scratching the surface here. It's clear that this is just the start of a much bigger conversation about the future of nuclear power. What role does the U.S. want to play in all of this? It's a big question.
Huge question. And it's a conversation we all need to be a part of. Nuclear energy, it's powerful stuff. And the choices we make now about how we use it or don't use it, they're going to echo for generations to come.
No doubt about it. Now, before we wrap things up, let's shift gears a bit and talk about what this bill could mean right here at home in the U.S. It's easy to get caught up in the, global picture, but this bill, it could have a real impact right here in the U.S. too, right? Like domestically.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. One of the big things this bill is pushing for is finding ways to replace Rosatom, right? Globally. And that opens up a big opportunity for American companies to, step in and fill that void.
So this could actually be a win for the U.S. nuclear industry.
It could be, yeah. You see, the bill specifically encourages, it wants the president to prioritize U.S. companies and their allies when they're looking for those alternative suppliers.
Right.
So, yeah, we could see new jobs, more investment in nuclear technology here at home, and maybe, just maybe, a chance for the U.S. to, reassert itself as a leader in the global nuclear market. It's a possibility.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty strong argument. But let's be real, there are going to be challenges, right? It's not going to be...
Oh, of course not. I mean, you don't make a big policy shift like this without hitting a few bumps in the road, right?
Right.
The U.S. nuclear industry, it's had its ups and downs lately. Getting production ramped up to meet that kind of global demand, it's not going to be a walk in the park, that's for sure.
And we can't forget about that existing agreement we have with Russia, that nuclear cooperation agreement, the 123 agreement. There was some eyebrows raised about that, too.
Right, right. This bill, it actually wants a full report, a deep dive into the national security implications of that agreement. Seems like Congress wants to take a closer look, see if working with Russia on nuclear stuff, especially with everything going on in Ukraine, see if it still makes sense, if it's still a good idea.
Which takes us right back to Congressman Kean and his worries about, Russia maybe using his nuclear capabilities to throw its weight around a little.
Exactly. This whole report on the 123 agreement, it's like a gut check, Is this cooperation really in our best interest? Or has it become, a liability or risk we can't afford to take?
So it's not just about replacing Rosatom on the world stage. It's about taking a step back and looking at the whole relationship with Russia when it comes to nuclear power.
Exactly. This bill, it's sending a message, a pretty clear message. The U.S. is serious about reevaluating this whole relationship, and we're not afraid to make big moves to push back against Russia's aggression.
Wow, this has been eye-opening is an understatement. We've covered so much ground today. It's incredible. Rosatom's global reach, China's nuclear ambitions, finding a way to replace Rosatom, those waivers, the safety concerns with those plants they built, and now this whole thing about the U.S. nuclear industry and what happens with Russia.
Wow. It's a
Yes.
lot, right? It really shows you how something that seems, I don't know, kind of technical, like just bill making its way through Congress, can have these massive ripple effects. It's all connected.
Absolutely. And it's clear this is just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah.
This is just the start of a much bigger conversation, a global conversation about, the future of nuclear power. What does that look like? And what role does the U.S. want to play in all of that?
Big, big questions.
Yeah.
And we all need to be asking them.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about, that's for sure. If you're interested in, learning more about this whole thing, and I know you are, it's fascinating stuff. We encourage you to look up HR 80046, search for the Rosatom Sanctions Enforcement Act, read the whole thing, it's worth it. And hey, while you're at it, if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. Until next time.